Hello everyone, my name is Bryan Ward-Perkins and I have the honour of introducing this year's Ertegun lecture for Oxford alumni. The Ertegun lecture is named in honour of Mica Ertegun, an extraordinary benefactor to the humanities at Oxford. Mica set up a graduate programme of scholarships, which is quite exceptional because it also involves a beautiful house in St Giles, a desk for each graduate scholar, a senior scholar who is there to help them with problems and with advice, and an administrator. And the idea behind this scholarship is that graduates from the humanities, across all the humanities, philosophy, theology, literature, whatever, should work together and exchange ideas. I was the first Oxford director of this programme, and it's fantastic. It was the best thing in my career because it was just so exhilarating to be able to meet young people from across the globe, talk to them, listen to them, see them thrive in these particular conditions. The scholarship has been running for 10 years. And in fact, next year is the 10th anniversary and has already over 100 alumni. So it's been an enormous success. This year's lecture is particularly appropriate because in fact, it's about another project that Mica has sponsored, the excavations at Aphrodisias. And we're very fortunate to have the two best qualified people to talk about it talking to us now. Bert Smith, the Lincoln Professor of Classical Archaeology at Oxford, who is the overall director of the project, and Niarchos, the Nikos Stavros, Associate Professor of Byzantine Archaeology, who is the field director of the project. In a minute, I will pass over to Bert, who is speaking first, but one practical thing for you to know, you the listeners, if you look at the Q&A box, which I think is at the bottom of your screen, if you want to ask a question, do please type in a question at any point during the talk. And at the end of the talk, if there's time, I will try and field as many questions for the speakers as I possibly can. But at this point, I will hand over to Bert.
Thank you, Brian. Let me share my screen. Is that showing okay? Good. Thank you very much indeed, Brian. Aphrodisias is a remarkable site, known for its wonderful combination of nature and ruins. It also is one of the very best places to study the strange world of Greek culture under the long Roman imperial peace. That's to say the first 6 centuries AD. You see here a view over the city centre with the Erdogan Pool in the middle left. Aphrodisias is a combined Oxford University and New York University project, and this is our website. It's a very great pleasure to acknowledge our close collaboration with Turkey's Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and to thank them for the fundamental permissions that make our work possible. Aphrodisias has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2017, something we're very proud of. This evening, Ina and I want to show you 2 of our main projects, the Erdogan Pool and the Tetrapylon Street, where you see here a vigorous scene of labor underway. First, a brief introduction to the site and our project. Aphrodisias is located in inland Caria, that's southwest Turkey, and it was a Greek city of the Roman period with a recorded history from say 200 BC to AD 600. Moving closer in, it's immediately south of the Meander River, that was the great east-west highway through Anatolia up to the coast. The city was famous in antiquity for its temple of Aphrodite and for its marble carving, for brilliant relief work and striking statues from gods to down and outs, like the fisherman statue on the right. There is a complete profile of statue honors, honorific statues of over 500 years. You see a city priest from around AD 200 on the left and a Roman governor from around AD 500 on the right. These are evocative faces of their times. The city has a clear gridded plan with an organization of housing blocks surrounding a neat urban center. It's very much a drawing board, Newtown plan. The city walls are about 3.5 kilometers long, and the population, hard to say, something like 10,000, which in ancient terms means a medium-sized city. In the next slide, we're going to look from the theatre to the east to see what the prosperity of this place was based on. You see the theatre, the red line of the walls, the quarries at the left where the marble came from, and in the middle distance, the immensely fertile territory which the wealth of the community was based on. You see here the main building complexes of the city centre named. I want to show you a few of these to show you the range and preservation of the site's monuments. These are mainly public buildings which served politics, religion, and entertainment. First, the Sebasteon. This was a temple for the worship of the Roman emperors, and it had no less than 200 marble reliefs decorating its processional way. The Tetrapylon was a grandiose marble gate from the street on the right into the sanctuary of Aphrodite on the left. The city had a full suite of spectator buildings, a magnificent stadium on the left, the Bouleuterion or council house at the top right, which was the political stage of the local elite, and bottom right, a theatre where the people, the demos, met. There was a large functional bathing complex with vaulted bathing halls and grand marble interiors. The whole city centre was lined with Ionic colonnades lining the public squares. These are for commerce and strolling, and they define the plan of the city centre. You see about 1.5 kilometres of Ionic colonnades defining the main public spaces. The city centre was full of public statues for local benefactors, like the young aristocrat on the right. The aims of our project are to study and publish, to research and excavate, and to educate the young in the process. This is a highly collaborative task. I show you our last pre-COVID team in 2019. There's about 40 students and colleagues working with about 60 local workers. This is highly collaborative and also, of course, expensive. The core funding for the project comes from Oxford University and New York University, and from loyal supporter groups, Friends of Aphrodisias, and large discrete projects from other generous donors listed here. In this context, I would like to say a special warm thanks to Mica Ertegun for reasons that will become clear in a second. So what do? We do education. We have seminars twice a week in the field on a wide range of themes. We do a lot of documentation. We make drawings and find maps for publication of material in its precise context. And we publish monographs that show our findings. You see here 2 recent volumes, 10 and 11, and there are several more on the way. We do a lot of conservation and anastylosis. Anastylosis is the technical term for correct restoration. That's to say, putting back up an ancient building exactly with every stone in the right place. It's stone for stone restoration. Our major work in this line in recent years has been the Sebasteon, that temple for the emperors. And you see here part of that great marble picture wall with reliefs of the emperors up above and Greek heroes down below. These reliefs have been studied, published, restored, and displayed in the local museum. What you see in the restoration here is real architecture with copies of the reliefs. The purpose of this is to allow the visitor to see and feel the scale and effect of a unique ancient building. Roman emperors had lots of temples, but none quite like this. Our current work consists of 2 big collaborative field projects. One on the pool, the urban park in the center, number 1, and the Tetrapylon Street, number 2, which Ina will talk about. I want to talk now about the Erdogan Pool. This was a project begun in 2012 with the very generous support of Mica and Ahmet Ertegun, and it was finished 5 years later on time. Our starting idea, before we began excavation, you see the condition of the complex before we began, was to take seriously a Greek inscription inscribed where the red arrow is, which calls the complex a, quote, place of palms. This suggested there is a substantial palm grove here. In 2012, we found quite early on 2 things which back up the claim of the inscription. First of all, we found 2 rows of planting beds between the pool and the colonnade, suitable for taking trees. And from the mud excavated at the very bottom of the pool, we found palm tissue diagnosed by our archaeobotanist, Professor Mark Robinson, top left. So these three things, palm tissue, planting trenches, and a Greek inscription saying place of palms, makes us pretty sure there were palm trees lining the pool. We then set about excavating the complex by hand in thin layers over the whole pool at once. That's to say, going down in phase over the whole area so that you see the patterns of medieval settlement, for example, on the left coming up clearly in the whole area. So we went down modern, medieval, late antique, right down to Roman at the bottom. I show you a few scenes from the excavation. We used ramps to wheelbarrow the earth out into tractor trailers waiting at the side. We were lucky enough to have high-level visitors who came to consult and advise. You see here Linda Wagner, Andrew Wilson, who was masterminding the excavations, and Mica Ertegun herself on the right. We persisted through rain washouts, very annoying for the, very damaging for the stratigraphy, and through quite bad windstorms, as you see here. The excavation down to the Roman level was completed in 2017, as you see it here. So this is an urban park, a palm park with pool, very like what could be found in early imperial Rome at this time. The complex was conceived and first set up in the early imperial period, that's to say the 1st century AD. Those big park complexes in Rome had the same combination of trees, water, columns, and statues. You see, the pool is surrounded by a marble perimeter with a drain in between, and it has a kind of seat formation on top that looks both out towards the trees and in towards the pool. This will become relevant in a second. We're now engaged in the conservation of the pool and the publication in a monograph of all the amazing finds found during this work. First of all, the conservation. You see here one of our conservation rigs that's going around the pool perimeter, restoring the delicate marble paneling that faced the interior and the seating on top. We're also landscaping the space between the pool and the colonnade. And here we hope eventually to plant a few sample palm trees to give the visitor the idea of what this complex was like. You see here on the right, the double bench on top of the pool, looking in and looking out with the drain between that was covered by a slab. These surfaces were covered with an extraordinary array of graffiti, semi-public writing, drawing, and game boards, which is one of the most remarkable aspects of this complex. Its very intense use and writing. I show you one example. Someone has engraved 2 portrait busts of athletes and written up above a small text message. A man called Colotron, who is the head gold worker, hopes his God will remember him. The cross at the beginning shows that his God is the Christian God. This is the footplate looking into the pool. And I next show you a drawing which shows you the context of the athlete portraits. And on the left, a conspectus of game boards, religious signs. There's a menorah and a drawing of a water bird at the bottom left. To give you an idea of the density of these finds, I show you a map which shows you the complete conspectus of interventions by graffiti artists all around the pool. There are 517 different graffiti events, which have all been logged, numbered, transcribed, interpreted, ready for including in the forthcoming volume. This is backbreaking work. I show you the epigraphist Angelos Kaniotis with his small team of epigraphists diagnosing some game boards. The finds in the pool were astonishing. The pool went out of use sometime in the early 7th century, after which it began to be used as a dump for material from the collapsed colonnades and then was accumulating in the space between. Lighter items were thrown further in. Heavy items like large rocks couldn't be thrown very far and accumulate at the edge, leaving this appearance as if the tide has just gone out. This is one late antique stratum. An astonishing array of material was found. You see here, for example, 2 reliquary crosses, some rolled lead scrolls, and a Byzantine coin. At the top, a lead seal, a silver medallion, the marble votive of someone who's had his eyes fixed by prayer to a god. Down below, a gold glass ornament, a glass medallion, a glass pendant, and some blades and weapons at the bottom right. huge quantities of ceramics from the Roman period right through to the modern period. Here's some Balik pottery of the 14th century, with on the left, one of the plates of pottery from the forthcoming volume. This being Aphrodisias, there's a lot of carved marble. A lot of the revetment from the back wall of the colonnade was thrown into the pool, including the little Eros pilaster capitals like that on the right, which stood at the top of the back wall design. Even parts of statues were thrown into the pool. This head of a late Roman governor was found exactly as you see it on the left, thrown in and left facing up. There's barely a scratch on it. Heads like this in this period often have little Christian text messages written on top of the head. This one, despite prolonged searching, did not have such a marking. We eventually found it hidden behind the subject's beard, but behind his beard on his neck. You see on his neck 3 letters, chi, mu, gamma, which is Greek, short in Greek for Christon Maria Genar, or Christ was born to Mary. This is a strong affirmation, probably by the Christian sculptor marking his work secretly. One other head found on the pool floor is probably one of the very last marble statues made at Aphrodisias, and they go with excellent quality right up to the end. This is another governor. He has a highly fashionable hairstyle with his hair drilled out on the sides of the head, but a balding pate on top, a rather endearing combination of fashion and truth. So this is what we've been doing in the pool, but what did this whole complex look like? We've done a preliminary 3D computer rendering to give you some idea of the feel for the place. You see the colonnades behind, rows of trees between it and the pool itself with the marble surround. This little frog fountain is not a piece of modern imagination. We have several of these in colored marble drilled through for water to spout out of them into the pool. This then is our mighty Ertegun Pool project, and I'd like to hand over now to my colleague Niarchos to talk about the Tetrapylon Street.
Okay, thank you, Bert. This is the second large project currently underway at Aphrodisias, the excavations of the Tetrapylen Street, or a late Roman street. Bert, if you could move to the next slide. The Tetrapylon Street was the main street of the city, and if we go back to this slide, you can see that it actually provided access to and linked together many of the public areas that you've already seen in this talk, including at the top of your screen here, the Temple of Aphrodite, and that is through the Tetrapylon that then gives the street its modern name, all the way down to the South Agora, or the Place of Palms, and then the theater all the way in the south at the bottom of your screen. Excavations were aimed at uncovering this major avenue, but in the process, they also provided extremely rich information on the post-Roman phases of the site. So this area of the Tetrapylon Street is an area where occupation can be traced over a period of about 2,000 years, all the way from the 1st century AD to the recent life of the village that was still present on the same location when excavations were begun in the 1960s. And this can be taken quite literally. We have uncovered living room floors, garden sheds, or as for instance on this slide, an outhouse toilet of the late 19th or the early 20th century. Excavations have also made it painfully clear to us that the age of plastic was already in full swing when the village on top of the site was eventually moved to its new location. So each year when we start excavating, we recover next to empty plastic bottles, things like batteries, pens, modern china, shoe soles, barbed wire, and so on. But if we dig below that, at a lower level, we encounter colorful Ottoman glazed ceramics like these two plates on the slide that are more or less contemporary with the complex of a workshop that you see on the right of the slide, where the large open ceramic vessels in the middle were probably used for the dyeing of cloth. Underneath this cloth workshop, the next phase is represented by a small bathhouse or a hammam constructed around the year 1300. And this was probably a very welcome amenity at the time, at a stop along one of the commercial routes that connected the west coast of Turkey with areas further inland. And as you can see, this hammam directly overlays the remains of the street, and in fact, it recycles a lot of the street's building materials in its walls. The area of the Tetrapylen Street then is also characterized by a strong Byzantine presence, recognized mainly in smaller finds, including on the slide here, these 9th and 10th century seals, some of them coming from very important functionaries with ties directly to the Byzantine capital at Constantinople or modern-day Istanbul. Occupation in the buildings alongside the street also obviously continues, and that's what you see on the right of this slide. It's actually indicated by a series of door sills at an increasingly larger height above the pavers of the late Roman street. One of the most exciting finds of the last years for the excavation team was that the occupation at Aphrodisias was also there in preceding centuries. So the 7th and 8th centuries are represented by what are for the time quite monumental remains. This multi-room structure that you see at the top left of the slide was constructed in a period that was and still remains so badly represented and so badly understood that it is commonly referred to as the Byzantine Dark Ages. So we have quite interesting remains for this period. And this Dark Age occupation is then finally located on top of a thick layer of debris, talking about 70 centimeters, so 70 centimeters of stone, brick, and tile that had come crashing down on top of the street pavement as a result of a heavy earthquake, which toppled probably many more buildings in the city center. And when we get to this layer each year, its surface is carefully cleaned and meticulously excavated, as it very often perfectly reflects the original architecture. Bert, would you mind going back one slide?
Sure.
So as a consequence, because of this careful cleaning, finally, the still perfectly articulated remains of a very fanciful colonnaded street appear every year. The blue paved road of the street, which is very typical for this period, was flanked by shaded walkways at least 2 stories high. The white columns of the lower story were newly produced at a very late moment in time. They have rather quirky capitals, Ionic capitals, crowned by heavy blocks from which sometimes perfectly preserved brick arches then sprang. And this was a very important street, as I've already mentioned. We also now know that it was used for all kinds of official events and parades. Several of its columns actually still preserve up until today traces of painted inscriptions applied in red paint on patches of white plaster whenever such an event took place. And this process was repeated several times, as indicated by the many layers of plasters on top of each other. The texts are again framed below and at the bottom by crosses. We are in the Christian period. One of them, for instance, praises the Christian God. There's another that praises the Roman emperor as, quote, Lord of the inhabited world, unquote. The Tetrapylen Street that we have excavated and visible today is definitely a late Roman street. It was in its entirety created at some point in the later 5th century. It succeeded another street, a much earlier street, but the remains of this predecessor have been uncovered only in very few occasions and locations because they're located at a much lower level. The difference in height is, for instance, very clearly visible in front of the gate to the Sebasteon. The remaining earlier pavement slabs, all in white, are here located about a meter below the late Roman street, recognizable again because of that strong blue color. And the reason behind this decision to raise the level so drastically is even today very visible after every summer rain. By the late 5th century already, the city center was dealing with severe water problems. Its lower lying areas must have flooded on several occasions. And it's actually for this reason that also the place of palms, or the South Agora, was severely changed around this time, a change that also included a strong rise in ground level. And the effects of the renovation of the place of palms, or the South Agora, were also felt in the street area and not in a positive way. On this slide, which is fairly technical, but you can actually see the original early imperial level at 516.80 meters, indicated in white. Indicated in yellow is a new level of the late 5th century, with pavement slabs that would have been located at around 517.4 meters. However, midway through this enormous infrastructural operation, the builders had to adapt their original plans. They did eventually not lay their pavement at this level, at the level that they had planned, but they threw on another 40 centimeters of soil or so on top of that original level, with the pavement then eventually put in place at a height of 518 meters above sea level. Like the changes to the place of palms, doing this enormous infrastructural operation for the entire street over a length of about 150 meters is really an enormous enterprise. But the end result is equally impressive. The street that eventually came into being had a paved road of slightly under 8 meters, with a colonnaded walkway to the east that was 3 meters wide, and another walkway to the west with an exceptionally large width of more than 7 meters. So in total, we're talking about a street of about 18 meters wide, which is quite impressive for its time. The area to the east of the street was occupied by houses belonging to the Aphrodisian elite. And in fact, also the upper floor of the colonnaded walkway belonged to these properties, as has been confirmed by the very rich finds here, including white and black marble floor tiles of the apartments on the upper floor. There are only a few entrances into these residences, but even these already attest to the enormous wealth that lies beyond the current edge of the excavation. Notice here the richly decorated door frame, the fancy floor in front, and the bronze doorknobs that must have belonged to the wooden door panels. Dozens of kilograms of window glass also make it clear that these upper floor rooms were all well lit, which no doubt benefited the views of the very rich wall decoration that was in place here. This consisted again of wall pilasters topped by figured pilaster capitals showing putti engaged in all kinds of activities, including here this young hunter holding a stick for striking hares. Some of these capitals have been found largely complete, but as you can see at the bottom right of this slide, sometimes we uncover these small feet all by themselves. The walls in between the pilasters were then decorated with colored frescoes as well as wall mosaics, part of which were gilded. There were bronze vessels present on the upper floor when it collapsed. Among them, for instance, this high quality bronze jug with a carefully worked Satyr mask at the lower end of its handle. And finally, like almost every other public space in Aphrodisias, also this street must originally have been lined with statues of local dignitaries, some of them centuries old, some of them very recent additions. But however, it's because of this very rich post-Roman, post-earthquake history of the area that not a single one of these statues has been retrieved in its original location. Actually, at several points in time, they were recycled again as useful building materials, amongst others as sturdy foundations for later structures. The excavations of the Tetrapylen Street are almost completed, so that in a few years' time, it will again be possible to walk along the original route over the pavement slabs themselves from the Tetrapylon in the north in the direction of the theatre and in the direction of the place of palms in the South Agora. But for now, we hope to have shown how interesting and how amazing the site of Aphrodisias is. And of course, we again offer a huge thanks to all our sponsors, in particular to Mica Ertegun for making all this research possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bert and Ina, very much for a splendid overview of an extraordinary site. And actually, I have a question myself, which is, I mean, it is remarkable when you look at the plan, how much of this city is sort of filled with public buildings and, 170-meter long pool surrounded by palm trees. And that's just, one of these public buildings. And then you see the street, 18 meters wide, as you explained, Ine. I mean, is this normal in a 10,000 population city, or is it an exceptional city?
I would say it's exceptional for this period because at this time, Aphrodisias was a provincial capital, which meant it had a much longer continued prosperity. But it's thoroughly normal for the Roman imperial period, when even quite small places, by our reckoning modern village size, have very grandiose metropolitan architectural ideas about what building inventory they should have.
And Ina, what about the street? Is that just normal?
The street is actually very normal for both imperial and late Roman standards. Yes, every city that was part of the Roman Empire would have had at least one, and most of them had several of these very monumental avenues because they are such multifunctional spaces that can be used for a whole range of activities.
And actually, this leads on into a question that we've received from somebody listening, which is, what actually surprised you from the excavations? Question to either of you or both of you.
Let me go first. I'm constantly surprised. I mean, I would not have expected to find 4 perfectly preserved, extraordinarily high quality portrait heads simply thrown into the pool and to have them in almost mint condition. But the place is full of surprises because it's so well preserved compared to other sites. I'm sure Ina has her own favorites too.
What was most surprising and definitely exciting for me is the fact that we have an extraordinary amount of evidence for a period that so far is hardly understood. So the potential of some of the evidence that doesn't look very impressive, but could be extremely influential for the history of the site, the region, and what is the Roman Byzantine Empire in the 7th and 8th century after Christ, is very exciting for me personally.
Okay, thank you. And we also have a question about the game boards, which is, can one, well, first of all, can one actually reconstruct the games that are being played? And have these been reconstructed for schools and museums? I mean, in order to get people to interact with the ancient world in an active way?
For the first part, yes. The second part, I think, no. These game boards are extremely well studied, and there is a whole academic journal devoted to ancient board games. So actually how the games were played and how they work is well understood. As far as I know, they're not being used in schools, but I see Ina has got something to add here. Go on, Ina.
I think it's currently still underway. There's a project, I think it's based in Germany, I'm not entirely sure, that registers all these game boards, and they have on their website suggestions for you to play at home and games to be put on in schools as well. I can't remember the name of the project. It's something Ludus something, but they're definitely, they see the potential of this.
And one important question, is the website in English or is it in German?
It's in English.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. And in fact, actually, I had a question about the game boards. There are so many of them. Why do they need so many? I mean, surely not everybody was playing these games at the same time. Why couldn't they just sort of, move around and use the ones that were free?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who want to play, Brian, and what you're seeing is an accumulation of maybe 200 or 300 years worth of game boards, which are presented all at once as if operational at the same time. But I think the main thing to take away from this extraordinary assemblage of graffiti is that this is a representation for us of something we know well from other sources, that it was the function of a citizen of a city like this to do no work. They live off the fruits of the countryside, and it's the role of a citizen to attend assembly, to be around town, maybe do some trading, but to do no real work himself. And a lot of free leisure time is vital, and these game boards represent that free time.
Okay, thank you. So they really are drones living off the fat of the land. Okay, and you were busy excavating them. I have a question, in fact, from an Ertegun alumna, Lena Zlock, asking to what extent has sort of, digital technology sort of altered archaeology? I mean, you showed us that wonderful reconstruction at the end. I mean, is it a really crucial part now of, what one does as an archaeologist?
It's your turn.
Yes, I do think it has in some ways revolutionized what we do, although we use digital techniques supplementary to the methods and techniques that we already used in the past. So for instance, we will not be replacing hand-drawn plans by entirely computer-made plans. That doesn't work very well. It makes the distance between the archaeologist or the drawing person and the actual object or the space, it makes the distance too large. If you have to draw things by hand, you have to be very close to them, and it makes you understand them better. But some of the other techniques, like for instance, we do use drones now to do aerial photography, to sometimes make 3D reconstructions with either the drone or with an ordinary camera, which makes it possible to revisit a site years after and look at something from all sides. So that has definitely helped. And things like, of course, geophysics, LiDAR, those are all wonderful additions to the work that we have been doing already for a very long time.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have a question about, how has Aphrodisias, and the project reacted to pandemic, and what's that actually meant for the project?
Well, it meant that last year was extremely difficult. The COVID situation abated a little bit in the summer, and we were able to have a small team carry out some basic conservation work at the site and a lot of documentation in the depots. But our major projects like excavating on the street, detailed conservation in the pool were stopped. And what this summer will be like remains to be seen.
Good. And I mean, let's hope that this summer, is different. I think we are all hoping that, not just for the benefit of Aphrodisias excavations, but for every single reason under the sun. Now, I have another question from another Ertegun alumnus, from Andrew Hofstedler, who is working here in Oxford, and he wants a little bit more detail about those Christian symbols that are put onto the three letters. Are they connected with the debates around the role of Mary in the 5th century? For those who don't know, in the 5th century, suddenly Mary emerges as an enormously important figure and as the Theotokos, the bearer of God. And she becomes enormously important, but it's also debated and discussed, I mean, exactly how important she is. So Andrew's asking you, is this part of that wider debate?
It could be, but I think the examples we have are probably earlier than the Council of Ephesus. Ephesus, of course, is just up the road, so they would have been, those who were interested could have been well informed about what was going on at that council. But this Chi Mu Gamma is so widespread on so many different materials and supports in the period, it doesn't look like it has a strong theological thrust to it. It's more a kind of emphatic statement of Christian belief.
Okay. And I have a question about the economic basis of Aphrodisias' prosperity. You mentioned the marble quarries and you mentioned the agriculture. I mean, is it, you know, that straightforward? And again, I suppose I would throw in, you know, how specialized is it? I mean, does the marble quarries play a really important role, or is it just that the agricultural base for every Roman city was the key feature?
The agricultural base is absolutely key, and ancient historians will put the figure at, you know, something like 70, 80, 90% of the economy is based on agriculture, with another 30, 20 or 10% based on artifactual production and trade. Aphrodisias doesn't actually export finished marbles like other places. The quarries are big enough for its own use and products, for its own buildings and statues. It does, however, export its very best artisans. Its best sculptors go all over the empire, making and signing their work. But as far as we can tell, the main productive economy is going to be largely agricultural.
And then I've got a question which I think we could break into two, which is, I mean, obviously Aphrodisias, the archaeology is amazing. Without the archaeology, what would we know from the texts? I mean, would we be aware that this was a remarkable city? And I suppose we could break that down, first of all, into the classical city, question for you, Bert, and then we could move to the Byzantine city and the sort of Dark Age city, a question for you, Amy. So if you could both take that one at a time.
But in the classical period, in the Roman period, we'd know almost nothing about it. It crops up occasionally for its sanctuary of Aphrodite, and it occurs occasionally in late Republican history, but basically not at all. In late antiquity, in the 5th century AD, it suddenly bursts onto the scene as a center of Platonic philosophy. There was a long philosophical tradition in the city. There was a famous Aristotelian philosopher called Alexander of Aphrodisias, who worked both at Aphrodisias and in Athens, who we have lots of writing of. And we have accounts, very kind of febrile accounts of intense Neoplatonic activity in the 5th century. After that, Ina will have to tell you.
Well, the Dark Ages are called the Dark Ages for a certain reason, including because there are no texts from this period that tell us anything. We have no texts about Aphrodisias for these centuries. We have a couple of texts that talk about a Byzantine bishop, I believe in the 10th or 11th century, that mainly tell us that he's not very keen to be at Aphrodisias, but that he would much rather be in the capital of Constantinople. But that again may have been a general thing. Constantinople was still a very vibrant location to be, whereas the rest of the world seems to have been a bit less exciting than it was in the classical world. Aphrodisias definitely wasn't a city anymore in Byzantine times. It was a very large settlement, but nothing as impressive as its classical predecessor had been.
Okay, if I could follow up from that, I mean, as you know, Ina, there's a lot of debate about whether one can refer to the Dark Ages. Yes, they're dark in the sense that the texts are a little bit thin. Do you think they're dark in any other sense? Can we reasonably say that this is, a period of very considerable economic contraction and crisis even?
It's a very specific question, but yes, I do think that they are much darker than the centuries and decades that preceded them. And it's not just the texts that are lacking. For a very long time, it was also the archaeology. It's not that people are not there, but they suddenly, what they leave behind is very different from what we know from the classical world. So if you're excavating with a classical eye, it's sometimes very difficult to recognize what they leave behind in the 7th and 8th century. So for a very long time, nobody knew that these people were actually still there. We are only really slowly, and in a couple of sites only, still discovering that they are still there, and in considerable numbers probably. There have been attempts at renaming this period, but nobody has really succeeded, in my opinion, at least, to come up with an alternative term that is less apt or more apt than Dark Ages. Anything from transitional period, it's all very vague and very neutral. But I think it's perfectly acceptable to still call them slightly less Dark Ages than 10 years ago, but still Dark Ages.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have a question which is very definitely aimed at Bert, which is about what exactly, I mean, the sculpture of Aphrodisias has been known for quite a long time. How has recent work, as it were, altered one's perception of Aphrodisias as a center of sculptural production?
Well, before work at the site began, the Aphrodisian sculptors were known from astonishing signed works in Italy. And one of the motivating drivers of the early excavations in the 1960s was a simple question, was what was production in the home city like? And this question has been answered more abundantly than anyone could ever have expected. And the answer is that there is a huge range, and at the top, it's every bit as good as what you will find in metropolitan Rome. We got what I think we have is a complete profile of carved marble production from the very top of provincial society right down to quite a low level, with massive quantities driven by mid-imperial prosperity.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just reading the questions. Yes, an interesting question, which is that from Russell Quinn. You've been excavating large public spaces and sort of impressive buildings. Is there any work being done on what you might call ordinary houses and ordinary streets?
We've done quite a lot of work on, there's quite a number of houses excavated. They're mainly houses from around the city centre, so tend to be quite grand addresses. But one of our next major projects, which we didn't talk about at all, is a project called the House of Kibberly. And this is a housing complex up near the city wall, which combines both a grand late Roman residence and a neighborhood with all kinds of other things, which we hope might answer the question that you've just asked.
Okay, and I think that also answers a question from Jason Tamides, who's asking, where you're going to move on from. Is that the sort of going to be the focus of the excavations in the next few years?
It's one of our next big projects is to re-explore this partly excavated house and its neighborhood, and to combine that with a study of all the other excavated houses down the full range that are already at Aphrodisias. And there's quite a big range from grand town mansions down to quite modest affairs in the outer reaches of the urban plan.
Okay. And this is a complex question from Ian Desai, which in fact I'd like to put to both of you, because Ina, you're actually sort of, running the team on the ground. In the picture, it looks like you had a large local team of collaborators. Could you discuss the cross-cultural and cross-national dynamics of this excavation? Have global politics and/or changes in best practices for foreign teams evolved how you work? And I can understand the background to this question, because obviously in the old days, excavations in Turkey were a bit of cultural imperialism by Western people, imposing their idea, and obviously specifically interested in the classical Roman past as not Turkish, not Muslim, but part of our background. So I think this question, it does raise interesting, broad issues. Probably, Bert, you should answer this first, and then I'd like to have Ina's perspective on it as well.
Yeah, well, we have a deliberately international team. Our students come mainly from Turkey, Oxford, and NYU, in a mixture of about 50% Turkish, 25% Oxford, 25% NYU. Then we have a large group of professional colleagues from the UK, US, Greece, Austria, France, you name it, who come to do particular projects or have particular specialities. We have a very large contingent, a very brilliant and faithful body of local workers and experts who've been with us for decades, many of them highly skilled excavators, many of them highly skilled conservators and marble restorers. So at all points around the site, at all of the different limbs of the project, there is quite a big mixture of people engaged.
Thank you. And Ina, would you like to put your particular spin on this question?
To add to that, I would also like to say that the excavations have definitely also evolved throughout the decades and the years, and that is reflected indeed in the much larger attention that these days is being paid to post-Roman remains, everything after classical antiquity, up until the day that the village that was on top of Aphrodisias was moved is given proper attention nowadays. I've shown you a photograph that included plastic bottles and barbed wire, and that is because we do even that we register. It's also great as a training excavation for students, and they learn their stuff in 1960s houses. But also the research questions of the excavation team have expanded accordingly, and we have research projects now on what happened to the site in the 13th century, what did it look like in the 15th century, what changed in the 18th century, etc. So that research focus has broadened together with sorry, I lost my train of thought there. With the more attention to the remains of other centuries.
Now I'm going to allow one last question, because it comes from another Ertegun alumna from Nefeli, who will be well known to both of you. And this is a question probably for Bert. What do we know about the hinterland, all the agricultural settlements? I mean, is there work being done on, where people lived in the countryside and what they were doing?
Yes, there was an excellent regional survey conducted over 5 years of the up to the complete boundaries of what we think the ancient territory of Aphrodisias consisted of, carried out by my colleague Christopher Rattay and published in a splendid Aphrodisias monograph. And basically what this monograph shows is that the productive territory, with its mineral resources, its agricultural resources, and its defenses, it's a series of forts, are as well preserved in their way as the urban center. It's a very productive and busy landscape with lots of stuff going on, and a lot of it is still there.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time, and I do apologize to those of you who've put questions in which I haven't been able to reach. I'd like to thank very much the audience for being, in fact, very active in asking questions, and important and interesting questions which have taxed our speakers. Most of all, I'd like to thank our two speakers, who I think have given us a wonderful view of the city, and also thought, deeply about it. And we wish Aphrodisias excavations every success in the future in this new post-pandemic world. Thank you all very much.